Hello, Eisenhower Eagle students and families. Mr. Boyer here. The Eisenhower staff and I are thrilled that we get to welcome students back to school for the 2020-2021 school year. It's been nearly 6 months since we've seen you, and we've missed you all so much. I hope that you all made the best of your spring e-learning experience, and I hope you all safely enjoyed your summer break. I'm also very sorry that we couldn't host our traditional back to school open house. I know how important that is for all of us, but I promise that we are going to take care of all of you students when you enter our school doors on Tuesday morning. Now, all that said, it's time to share some important information with you regarding the upcoming school year. Before I get into those specifics, please know that everything we are doing at Eisenhower as part of our reopening plan was developed in accordance with the CDC, the ISDH, and the Kosciuszko County Health Department. Our plans are cautiously designed to protect the health and well-being of students, families, staff, and our larger Warsaw community. We do not just want to bring students back to school next week. We want to keep everyone healthy, and we want to keep our doors open for the entire school year. Without further ado, here are some of the specifics. Hey, to begin, we need to go over our staff. Now, we have just a handful of new ones, but I want to I go through this, especially for our families that are new to us, in particular our new kindergarten families. So in kindergarten, we have Mrs. Broombaugh, English DLI teacher, Senora Burns, Spanish DLI teacher, and we have Mrs. Schramm. She's our non-DLI kindergarten teacher. In first grade, we have Mrs. Halstead, our non-DLI teacher, Senora Kirandongo, our Spanish DLI teacher, and Mrs. Setzer, our English DLI teacher. Mrs. Halstead is new this year, although she's not new to Eisenhower. She actually student taught in first grade in Mrs. Setzer's room last year as Miss Hill. She got married this summer, and now she is Mrs. Halstead. In second grade, we have Mrs. Cronin in our non-DLI classroom. We have Miss Goshert, our English DLI teacher, and we have Senora Hans, our Spanish DLI teacher. In third grade, we have Senorita Diener, our Spanish DLI teacher, Mrs. Moore, our English DLI teacher, and Mrs. Yantz, our non-DLI teacher. In fourth grade, we're welcoming Senora Hoover from Lincoln Elementary School. She's our new fourth grade DLI Spanish teacher. We have Mrs. Love, and Mrs. Love is our non-DLI teacher. And we have Mr. Roller moving into fourth grade this year as our English DLI teacher. In fifth grade, we have Mrs. Bontrager and Mrs. Doberstein back. And in sixth grade, we have Mrs. Fleming and Mr. Strite back. In special education, we have Mrs. Holton. Mrs. Holton is back with us. She was only away for a year. She's our EL teacher. We have Mrs. Jarecki Vossler and Mrs. Schaefer, our special education teachers. We have Mrs. Liu, our speech language pathologist. And our last new to the teaching staff is Mrs. Kreider. And Mrs. Kreider is our new DLI coach and literacy coach. In specials, we have Mrs. Burchett in media, Mrs. Garber in PE, Miss Milligan in music, Mrs. Murphy, and Miss Murphy, not related, in art. Then here in the office, we've got Mr. Boyer, principal, Mrs. Brugman, admin assistant, Mrs. Ransbottom, school secretary, and Mrs. Lisa Seacrest, our school nurse. Just so you can put faces with our new names, we've got Mrs. Halstead, Senora Hoover, Mrs. Holton, and Mrs. Kreider who have joined our teaching staff this year, and we're very excited to have all of them. Now, let's start with the important stuff. This year, school starts at 9:10 a.m. and ends at 3:45 p.m. That is a 10-minute shift. Again, school starts at 9:10 and ends at 3:45. The car rider doors for parent drop-off open and are open from 8:40 to 9:10. Bus riders will arrive at approximately 8:50, and this year Our breakfast eaters will grab and go in the cafeteria and report directly to their classroom for breakfast. And that is actually true of all students when they're arriving here. Every student, when they get here, will report directly to class. And we will have our primary students enter through door 9A at the parent drop-off area. That's the door we've always used. And then the gym door on the opposite side, or the north side of the building, door 9B, is where our intermediate or our 4th, 5th, and 6th grade car riders will enter. We'll actually use 2 doors this year to better space students out upon entry. Also, an important change. We are no longer doing Thursday late start. Rather, this year, it's Monday morning late start, and school starts at 10 a.m. The car rider doors will be open from 9:30 to 10. Dismissal will be a little bit different this year. Obviously, we've got that 10-minute shift in our end time, so we will dismiss at 3:40. Our BYC bus riders are dismissed first, and then rather than dismissing all car riders at once, we're going to dismiss our car riders in 3 waves. And you can see we're going to dismiss at 3:45, 3:47, and 3:49. And that, once again, just gives us an opportunity to reduce and limit the traffic that is flowing in our hallways. And then bus riders will sit in their class and wait for their buses to arrive out front, and we will call bus riders down by 1 bus at a time as they arrive. This is what our cafeteria will look like. So as you can see, I'm going to circle it here. This area right here is our cafeteria. We've got our door on the left-hand side and our door on the right-hand side. So as you can see, this year we have designated 6 specific eating areas, 2 tables per designated area. And what we will do is have assigned seats based on teachers' seating charts. We will have assigned seats in the cafeteria for our home rooms, and grade levels will sit on opposite ends of the cafeteria. So for instance, our kindergarten kids come in first. So Mrs. Broombaugh's class will sit at table 1. Mrs. Burns, or Senora Burns' class, will sit in this table group 2, and Mrs. Stram's class will sit in this table group 3 up near the serving area. We will also have staggered lunch times so that kindergarten comes in by themselves, and then 15 minutes later, our 4th graders come in, and we've got Senora Hoover's class sitting in table group 4, Mr. Roller's class sitting in table group 5, and Mrs. Love's class sitting in table group 6. And these tables in the black here will serve as the barrier between the opposing sides or the opposite sides that the grade levels are sitting on. Because we are entering on a staggered schedule, we'll also be exiting on a staggered schedule, so the kindergarten kids will leave 15 minutes before 4th grade, and so on. Now, when to wear and lower masks. Governor Holcomb recently passed or signed Executive Order 2039, mandating masks for all students in grades 3, 4, 5, and 6, and made them optional for students K1 and 2. Now, there are some unique circumstances within those particular mandates. So, I've got a graphic here to show you when our students are able to wear and when they're able to lower masks. So students, we start on this side, students must be masked when they are less than 3 feet from other students, and when they are less than 6 feet away from staff or adults. Staff, same thing. When they are less than 3 feet from students, they have to have their masks on, and when they are less than 6 feet from other staff members or adults, they have to have a mask on. Now, when can masks be lowered? Students, when they are 3 feet or more from their classmates or other students, or when they are 6 feet or more away from staff or adult. And the same goes from staff or for staff. They have to be at least 3 feet from students and at least 6 feet from other adults. All that said, we do have areas where masks are required for all students and all staff. Masks are required in all common areas. We're talking the doorways, the hallways, the buses, the restrooms, the office, the nurse's office, and not listed there, the line in the cafeteria. Those are common areas where all students and staff, K6, must wear their masks. Masks do not need to be worn during recess, PE, or obviously when students are seated in the cafeteria and they're eating. Understanding the terminology will be very important for all of us this year so that we're speaking the same language and on the same page about our potential responses to cases of COVID-19. So to begin, when we're talking exposure, we are talking about being within 6 feet for at least 15 continuous, uninterrupted minutes, mask or no mask. Now, exposure only happens when somebody is within 6 feet for at least 15 continuous minutes to a person who later tests positive for COVID-19. Now, when we're talking symptomatic, we're talking people that are experiencing any of the general COVID-19 symptoms, which I'll review for you here in just a moment. Asymptomatic, people who are not experiencing any symptoms but have tested positive for COVID-19. So right now, I am negative for COVID-19. I am not considered asymptomatic. I just don't have it. Somebody who is asymptomatic is positive, but they are not experiencing any symptoms. Contact tracing. Contact tracing is a process by which Warsaw Schools, the Kosciuszko County Health Department, and/or the Indiana State Department of Health identify those who have been exposed to an infected person. Isolation and quarantine. There is a big difference, too, between isolation and quarantine. And we may be discussing these with you based on positive cases this school year. So isolation is a person who has tested positive, and isolation is 10 days. Quarantine is separate. It's a person who has been exposed to an infected person and not tested positive, and quarantine is 14 days. You'll also hear us talking, or have heard us talking, about potting students. So all of our teachers have been asked to make best space or best use of the space within their classrooms to ensure that students are 3 to 6 feet apart if and when possible. So if we are in a classroom that is set up in traditional rows, and some of our teachers have their classrooms set up in traditional rows, we have the teacher in blue at the front of the classroom, and we have our students there. Let's say that the student in red later tests positive for COVID-19. When we talk about potting, we are talking about reducing and limiting the number of students who are potentially exposed to somebody who tests positive. So in this particular instance, we might be looking at 4 students who, if they are within 6 feet for 15 continuous minutes, may have to be quarantined for 14 days if they have in fact met that standard for exposure. And that's why we're potting students. The last thing we want to do is have to quarantine more students than what is necessary should we have a student or staff member test positive. We know how difficult that is for you, and we know how detrimental that is to our students' education. So we will do our best to pod students or reduce and limit the number of students that they are interacting with during the school day and the number of students that they potentially would be exposed to should a student test positive. So I've got a couple of examples of some of the classroom setups that I've seen so far this summer. On the left there, we have Mrs. Yance. And you can see with the student desks that she has traditional rows. Senora Burns has slightly different furniture because she is a kindergarten teacher. So she has taken her trapezoid tables, and rather than making hexagons, she has separated those so that we are reducing the number of kindergartens sitting next to each other to 3. Now, kindergarten, first, and second grade students, the mask mandate is a little bit different for them. Even though they are not required to wear their masks, they will during those times we said it's mandated, but they'll have more opportunities when needed to lower their masks if necessary. We did have students in summer school wear masks, including kindergarten, first, and second, and that went surprisingly well, which we're very excited about. A couple more examples. Mr. Strite, you can see his classroom is also set up in traditional rows, much like Mrs. Yance. And then we have Mrs. Cronin there, who has partnered her desks up and has them in traditional rows within those partners. So managing COVID-19 cases. It won't be unheard of for us to potentially have a positive case. And we have a very thought out system of response should we have one. First, in managing the cases, it's important to know what the symptoms are. Second, it's important to follow all of the precautionary guidelines, which I'll go over here in just a second. And third, we have to respond when needed with isolation and quarantine. And I want to talk about that a little bit more as well, just so that you better understand it heading into the school year. Here are the general COVID-19 symptoms, and this comes straight from the CDC. And these are symptoms that you are probably familiar with or that have become familiar with over the past several months. A fever of 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit or greater, a cough, new loss of taste or smell, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, chills, repeated shaking, muscle pain, headache, sore throat, congestion, runny nose, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Those are the general symptoms. So when we have students or staff displaying those symptoms, they'll be sent to the office to a designated quarantine spot that Nurse Lisa will be monitoring and managing. Symptomatic students or staff will be sent home to isolate for 10 days, and they can return after that as long as they are symptom-free for 24 hours. It's important to note too, sometimes we will have students with symptoms, and it could be allergies, it could be a common cold, it could be strep once we start getting into that season. Students and staff can return sooner than those or the isolation period of 10 days if a doctor checks, verifies, and provides documentation that the student has a condition separate from COVID-19. 3A, now if a symptomatic student were to get tested, they must isolate for 10 days and be symptom-free for 24 hours without any medication in order to return. Then if the test is positive, we would go back and trace and quarantine all exposed students and staff who were exposed up to 48 hours prior to the infected person's symptoms. And just as a reminder, quarantine is mandatory 14 days. Now, if the test returns negative, a doctor must provide a note and the student must be symptom-free for 24 hours. And then they're able to return and we don't have to quarantine any students. It's important to note, we only quarantine students when we identify those who have been exposed after a positive test only. Again, we are only quarantining students when we have a positive case. Now, 3B, if a student is sent home with symptoms and they don't get tested, they will isolate for 10 days and be symptom-free for 24 hours without medication in order to return. By not getting tested, it must be assumed that the student or staff is positive, but we don't quarantine because, as I just said, we only quarantine when we know we have a positive test and we know students were exposed or within 6 feet for 15 continuous minutes to that infected person. When should I get tested? This is an excellent question. We will no doubt have students, families, staff members who think that perhaps they maybe need to get tested. If you suspect that you've been exposed, or if you become symptomatic, the best thing to do is to immediately consult a healthcare provider. If you explain the circumstances, your healthcare provider can help determine if a test is necessary. If seeing a healthcare provider is too inconvenient, Nurse Lisa and our office staff working with the health department and our central office would be happy to hear the circumstances and provide you with guidance if necessary. The reason we tell you that is if a student who is symptom-free or a staff member who is symptom-free gets a test, they must quarantine until they receive their test results. I'll say that again. If you get a test, even though you have not any symptoms and it's determined you have not been exposed, and you get a test anyway, you have to quarantine until you get your test results. If the test results are negative, student or staff, you may return to school. If it comes back positive, then you go into that isolation period for 10 days from the date of the test, and you can return after you're 24-hour symptom-free. I know that's a lot, but here are some other important notes for parents and families. Isolation and quarantine is tricky to understand. I don't expect this video or the reading of all the other guidance we've released to be enough for you to have a grasp on this. It is difficult, and there are even cases and situations where sometimes I have to seek some guidance. I promise you this, though. In all of those cases that are unique, and all of them will be, we will manage by working together. Second, isolation and quarantine is mandatory. As I said, we're going to do everything we can to reduce the interactions and the potential exposures if we have somebody within the school test positive. But in the case where we have to isolate or quarantine students or staff, it is mandatory. Visitors must wear masks and are not permitted beyond the office until further notice. We regret that, but again, this is all precautionary, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that we keep students, staff, families, the community safe, and keep our doors open. We hope soon that we're able to welcome visitors and volunteers back into the school. We're also utilizing enhanced cleaning protocols daily and nightly. In addition to one hand washing break in the morning and one in the afternoon, all students will also wash their hands before and after lunch and recess. Students should also bring a refillable water bottle to school. Our drinking fountains are not going to be used until further notice. And also, PE will be held outside whenever possible, and our teachers are encouraged to and will conduct lessons outside when it's appropriate. Finally, our website and our social media pages, specifically Facebook and Twitter, were overhauled this spring and summer. Please make sure you bookmark and visit our website often. I will be updating it much more periodically. I will also, since we won't be having you here for the time being, I am going to do my best to constantly communicate through our Facebook page and our Twitter page with pictures and posts of the things that's going on around the school. I want you, though distant, to still see and feel a part of your child's education. Our Facebook page is on the left there at Eisenhower Eagles, so be sure to like it. And our Twitter page is at WCS_Eisenhower. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Wow, you made it. Thanks for hanging in there. Hey, I know that is a lot to internalize, so be sure to save it and revisit it as needed. I want to thank you in advance for your patience, your understanding, and your partnership this year. More than ever, our students need us to work together to ensure this is an excellent school year, and as I said, that we keep everybody healthy and that we keep the school open. Those are our primary goals. I promise you that we will communicate and be transparent. If we do have COVID-19 cases, families of exposed students will be notified first. After that, families of students in those homerooms will be notified that though there was a case within that homeroom, their students weren't exposed. If we have cases, we won't be informing the entire school. As I said, just those homeroom classes. To best help us this year, please know the symptoms of COVID-19 and monitor your children accordingly. And if students are sick, please keep them home. If you have to pick up a sick child, please do so as soon as possible, even if that means you have to make arrangements with grandparents, family, friends, or extended family. Don't put others at risk. Theoretically, a student could be knowingly exposed outside of school, be present at school for a number of days before displaying symptoms, and be at school before receiving a positive test. If we were to experience a case like that, we'll have to do extensive contact tracing and potentially have to quarantine a large number of students and staff, and none of us want that. We all have a responsibility to take care of one another this year. We're in this together, and we're going to go forward together. Thank you very much, and we know and look forward to what's going to be a great school year for our kids. See you next week.